It is now official. After days of speculation and will he, won't he, it's now been officially declared that Chinese President Xi Jinping will not attend the G20 summit in New Delhi later this week. Instead, Chinese Premier Li Qiang will attend the summit to be held on the 9th and 10th of September. That was announced today in a brief statement issued by the Chinese Foreign Ministry. The spokesperson also said, and I quote, "China hopes the summit can consolidate a consensus, convey confidence and promote development." China has always placed high importance on and actively participated in relevant events. In attending this meeting, Premier Li Qiang will convey China's thoughts and positions on G20 cooperation, pushing for the G20 to strengthen unity and cooperation and working together to combat global economic and development challenges. We are willing to work with all sides to push for the success of the G20 Leaders Summit and to make active contributions to promoting stable global economic recovery and sustainable development. That is what the statement said. No reason, however, was cited for the absence of Xi Jinping, who's expected to also skip the ASEAN summit in Indonesia later this week. Now, Premier Qiang will represent China at both these events. The Chinese state media Global Times said on X, China looks forward to the G20 New Delhi summit reaching a consensus on tackling challenges in the economy and development, conveying confidence to the outside world and promoting shared prosperity and growth. Interestingly, US President Joe Biden has said he is disappointed that his Chinese counterpart plans to skip the G20 meet in India. Though he told reporters, "I'm disappointed, but I'm going to get to see him." Biden did not clarify when that meeting might take place. Biden may have an opportunity to meet Xi in November when the US hosts the APEC conference in San Francisco. Now, the decision by Xi Jinping to skip the G20 summit comes close on the heels of a massive map controversy. On the 28th of August, the Chinese government released what it termed as the 2023 edition of the Standard Map of China. The map shows the entire Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh, which Beijing calls South Tibet, and Ladakh's Aksai Chin region within China's borders. In other words, claiming these areas as part of Chinese territory. The map instantly drew a sharp response from India. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar said, and I quote, "China has put out maps with territories not theirs. Old habit. Putting out maps with parts in India does not change anything. Our government is very clear about our territory. Making absurd claims does not make other people's territories yours." While they will not meet in Delhi during the G20 summit, Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke briefly on the sidelines of the BRICS summit in South Africa last month and agreed to work towards expeditious de-escalation along the line of actual control. Meanwhile, Xi is the second world leader to skip the G20 summit in India. Last week, Russia's Vladimir Putin conveyed to Prime Minister Modi his inability to attend the meeting. Putin told the Prime Minister that he intended to send Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov instead. His focus, he said, was on the special military operation in Ukraine. Leaders who have confirmed their participation in the upcoming G20 summit include US President Joe Biden, French President Emmanuel Macron, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva.
And are you disappointed that President Xi is not going to the G20? How do you explain that?
I am disappointed, but I'm going to get to see him.
刚刚我已经发布了消息，李强总理将率团赴印度新德里出席20国集团领导人峰会。我可以告诉你的是，20国集团是国际经济合作的主要论坛，中方历来高度重视，并积极参与相关活动。
All right, to understand this better, let's now go across to Ramakrishnan Sridharan, consulting editor with News9, who joins us live from Washington, D.C. Welcome back to Global Lens, Sri. Great to have you on the show. Now, we discussed on Global Lens just last week that it was almost a certainty that Xi was going to give this summit a miss and that he had decided to depute the Chinese premier to represent the country instead. However, what should we make of the fact that Biden, who just a couple of months ago described the Chinese president as a dictator, now says he's utterly disappointed that he's not going to meet Xi at the G20 summit in India.
Right, Neha, I think President Biden speaks for the United States and also for many of the member countries, including India, I would imagine, when he says that he's disappointed. While President Biden may have called, Mr. Xi Jinping a dictator, but the fact remains that, forums like G20 are places where all leaders get an opportunity to sit across the table and talk about common collective good and what needs to be done for the betterment of the world to create a better future. Now, unfortunately, China, Neha, has repeatedly dug its heels in. It has always chosen to go its own path. And it has, unfortunately tried to be intransigent on many of these global issues and in some sense aligning itself with Russia to basically take on the Western powers and therefore creating a deeper divide, a schism, if you will, in the multilateral system. So unfortunately, that behavior is now becoming more and more pronounced in the case of China. And this is truly unfortunate that Mr. Xi Jinping has decided not to come because a lot of the global leaders are going to be there. Indian Prime Minister is there as the host. So this would have been a great opportunity for China to actually resolve its differences. It has a very frosty relationship with the US, as you know, on multiple issues, and the fear that China has that it's being now isolated on the global stage. Given that, I think China should have made the effort to, Mr. Xi Jinping should have come and participated in the G20 meeting and, walked the, half a mile, if not the whole mile, to resolve the differences that exist between China and the rest of the world. So this, sends a very clear signal that China is not really willing to talk to global powers, to its global counterparts on any kind of equal terms. It wants to be treated, as a very different country, which probably is already a superpower. Now, I don't know if that's going to be acceptable to a lot of countries, including the US, Neha. So I think the first step that China needs to do is to start coming to these global multilateral fora if it wants to be taken seriously and integrated back into the global community, Neha.
Let me ask you this, Sri, before we move on to our next story, whether it is bilateral relations or multilateral issues, China's policy seems to be my way or the highway, something that clearly does not work in global diplomacy. Having said that, there have been multiple reports in recent days suggesting that, China has repeatedly adopted an obstructionist approach at various G20 meetings that have taken place across India in the run-up to the big summit that's coming up later this week. Even if Xi is not going to be present, even if Putin is not going to be present, they're sending their representatives. Given how these two countries have repeatedly thrown a spanner in the works in the past, even making it virtually impossible for, let's say, a joint declaration to be issued at certain summits in the past, do you believe this could emerge as a huge headache for India, for Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the government, who are obviously hoping to have a substantive New Delhi declaration at the end of the summit?
That's absolutely the point, isn't it, Neha? The reason also, I believe, why China has decided not to play ball. It doesn't want anything significant, substantial to come out of this meeting, which might be seen as India's, movement in G20, which probably solidifies its reputation as a very responsible emerging global power. Now, that is a narrative which China doesn't want. So I think it's in some sense an effort China is making to make sure that the talks, the wonderful way in which India has conducted the G20 talks for this year as the host country, it doesn't come to the sort of fruition that everyone expects, especially India. So this is unfortunate, Neha, but also a childlike, I would say, at some level. Having put in so much effort as India, and we have actually set a new way of holding the G20 meetings and the focused manner in which we did the different sessions and events. I think it's probably a template that the other countries will follow going forward. Given that, I think this declaration would have been very important, coming as it does in the scenario of a war that's happening between Russia and Ukraine, global climate change happening, economic uncertainty is still pretty much existing and hanging over the world. So this was a great opportunity for the world to have come together and committed to something substantial in terms of an economic cooperation, a sustainable development future. And it's truly unfortunate China has decided not to be part of this movement, at least with the
Unfortunate.
presence of Mr. Xi Jinping.
Absolutely unfortunate. It certainly is. And let's hope that it does not turn out to be a missed opportunity for the international community. This is a very important forum that we're talking about, the G20 summit.